The last time something was written off as the next Marvel's Avengers, one of the best games of 2021, Guardians of the Galaxy, was completely ignored and played by almost no one. There's nothing fair about being a game people want to hate, and people desperately wanted to hate Gotham Knights. It had been 7 years since the last Batman game, and what we got to scratch that itch had loot, levels, crafting, and co-op, most of which no one asked for, and all of which, as players now know too well, point to a game designed not for player enjoyment, but for player retention. This was going to be another corporate abomination, wasn't it? The second insult was that, like most corporate abominations, the development of Gotham Knights seemed to have been crippled and compromised to tick these money-making checkboxes. There are 4 characters, but it's 2-player co-op, in a game overwhelmingly designed for only one, half-hearted loot and leveling systems, and of course, the corporate abomination classic. The game released unfinished, its content was lacking, it had a 30 FPS limit on next-gen consoles, and its performance problems were so severe that it couldn't even consistently meet that. Gotham Knights still runs poorly, it still stutters, it still has pop-in. Let's be clear, this game deserved hate. It is another product of the greed that gave us Marvel's Avengers. But like Avengers, Gotham Knights also deserves for that hate not to cloud the truth. Let's not allow its high-profile failures to distract us from the rest of the things it screws up, or the things it gets right. If we're trying to be fair to Gotham Knights, then the first order of business is this. It's true, the game is worse than Arkham, but that doesn't really mean anything. Most things are worse than Arkham. It's also true that Gotham Knights looks worse than Arkham Knight, but so does almost every other video game in existence. Gotham Knights is still a good-looking game. The Arkham comparison is useful insofar as it highlights not what Gotham Knights hasn't done as well as something else, but what it has done wrong. Both games render an open-world Gotham, for instance, and though the racetrack city has far more problems than its fans would like to admit, its art design casts a clear light on Gotham Knights' principal problem: the lack of art design. From a distance, and only from a distance, the colored puffs of smoke that surround almost every significant lit building in this city succeed, and contribute to Gotham exactly the kind of comic booky quirk it needed. But you know what I see when I look anywhere else? New York. These are the same water towers, fire escapes, trains, billboards, apartment blocks, and skyscrapers we have seen countless times before, in the most common open-world setting there has ever been. Instead of tapping into Gotham's almost unlimited artistic potential, Knights casts itself as just another American city, amongst extremely stiff competition, and besides a purple skybox, it has nothing to set itself apart. It's not the biggest, it's not the tallest, it's not the prettiest. Of course it's unimpressive. These streets are familiar, and they're usually better. So why not be one of the many things a video game Gotham has yet to be outside of LEGO? Why not follow the more unrealistic art direction of the game's character design, UI, and combat stylizations, and commit to what Arkham Knight half committed to? Be a comic book wonderland, or a cathedral city of nightmares, or an art deco metropolis. Why just be a decent take on the most common setting in video game history? Gotham looks fine. It's surprising and depressing that's the best they could do. Arguably, the city's sense of life is just as important as the way it looks, and if the popular criticism is to be believed, Gotham doesn't have a lot of it. Stone-cold rows of 3D models, completely unconvincing and unable to engross. The critics aren't always wrong. It entirely depends on where you're looking from, especially if where you're looking from is the streets. What's most strikingly unnatural about Gotham is its stillness. Police vehicles don't and can't move. Enemy vehicles are exceedingly rare, and for a city under constant assault, you will never see a pursuit. The lack of traffic adds immensely to this impression. It's one thing to see empty streets in a nighttime ghetto. It's another for there to be one car in the commercial center and on the freeways leading out. It completely pulls you out of the experience. But then, there's the other hand. In other times and places, Gotham can truly pop. Citizens have semi-realistic conversations and react both positively and negatively to the sight of you. But mostly, it's the cops and robbers that account for Gotham's life. It's the random crimes, their locations signaled miles away by police lights flashing through the mist. The sound of so many in the distance builds up a convincing sense of simultaneity in Gotham. And then there's the simpler fact that there are so many. Muggings, suspects escaping custody, minor robberies, a crime scene, and then the big-time shit. Bank robberies, witness assaults, police assaults, illegal downloads, prison bus escapes, organ theft, civilian hostages, and criminal strongholds. Many of these have ambush variants, and almost all of them can feature almost every enemy faction. Solving crimes will lead you to criminal strongholds, and interrogating petty criminals will reveal bigger crimes the next night. What's especially impressive is that the police will show up to the scene once you're done, and you do need to vacate the area unless you want a challenging fight on your hands. You can also lure enemies towards the police, they will get involved, and that can make a difference. Immersion in Gotham is mediocre, but only on balance. In one moment, it seems drained of life completely, and in another, it can hit all the right notes. Looking beyond their contributions to life, the random crimes remain successful. The variation of fantasy is an obvious win, but many of these different ideas successfully entail a mix-up in gameplay too. Sometimes it's contextual interactions to be completed, which is an invitation to stealth. Sometimes it's a crime to solve, which actually has to be solved. Sometimes it's a point to defend. Sometimes it's people to defend. And sometimes you just have to mash everyone up. It's not perfect. Hoovering up clues from bloodied victims is ridiculous. The GCPD show up to the scene by emerging from the Shadow Realm, and the success of these crimes ultimately relies on the success of the gameplay systems involved, which are definitely not perfect. But as a series of contexts for that gameplay, the crimes are one of the game's best qualities. It's a shame then that they're not your primary mode of interaction with Gotham. No, that's movement. And it's here that you'll realize seeming to be the only thing in this city capable of motion is no great privilege. Let's start with a bat cycle. Word on the street is that it sucks serious dong. It's slow, it's boring, it's bitch made next to the Batmobile, and I've even seen an article that called it one of the worst vehicles in gaming history. What's true is that driving in Gotham Knights is mind-numbingly boring, but to place all the blame on the vehicle itself would be a misdiagnosis. The bat cycle sounds fine, handles fine, and drifts quite nicely. Admittedly, it's far too slow. Despite the bukkake of wind effects and motion blur, you are in fact traveling at what my mate's girlfriend calculated as a 45 mph top speed, which is under the speed limit. It's also only half the story. It's not like Arkham Knight's Batmobile was any faster. It's the city that makes the difference. It's that this Gotham wasn't designed to be played in. It's designed as a generic city, which is why, though far from as straight or as flat as true-to-life New York, it is still very straight and very flat. And without a density of traffic to avoid or a need to brake for corners, you're left with nothing to engage with whilst driving. Also, unlike Arkham Knight, the distances between each of the 3 island districts are vast, and must of course be crossed using a number of straight, flat freeways. Half the time you're in Gotham, you will need to cross from one district to another, and half the length of those journeys is going to be made of mindlessly holding forward for what feels like a lifetime on the same 4 bridges. Do you see the problem? Arkham Knight's Batmobile would be just as boring here, because Gotham conspires to place you on straight, flat, and empty roads, where the only thing to think about is how badly you wish you were going faster, or doing something else. The twat cycle is not the only way to move. Each character also has a barely functional replication of Batman's grapple gun, including his grapnel boost, that here is an awkward Hulk jump instead of a mechanically assisted boost. Commendably, you also have Arkham's depth of cancelling grapples, which allows for quick and precise movement over certain distances, so long as you have the skill to time it. This is the baseline, shared by all 4 characters. On top of that is one unique knighthood ability for each of them. Batgirl, for instance, has a barely functional replication of Batman's cape. She can't fluidly respond to building contact, and altering her flight pitch looks like you're ratcheting her entire body, but at the end of the day, it's still the Arkham cape. It's a movement mechanic. You have to trade height for speed. There's a turning circle to consider and master. Moving her feels good and is engaging, which is more than can be said for the bike, or any other hero. Red Hood can wub-dub jump, Nightwing can Fortnite glide, and Robin can teleport, all of which ask of you only one thing. Yeah, instead of mindlessly holding forward on the big booty bicycle, you can now mindlessly hold forward in the air or in hyperspace. The animations for Nightwing's glider are admittedly solid. Game feel puts it a step above Red Hood and Robin, whose teleport is tantamount to a fucking debug mode, and might possibly be the worst implementation of superhero movement that I have ever seen. Even fast travel finds a way to melt your brain. Unlocking it for each district is nothing so convenient as a Ubisoft tower. It's a pair of microscopic drones you have to find and scan, which you will do slowly and as you stumble onto them, because searching for them deliberately is so completely mind-numbing. When you're in Gotham solely to move through it, which is most of the times you're in it for the sake of the campaign, its strengths become irrelevant, and you will begin to resent its wet and endless asphalt. Cats, the moon, the cast of Life is Strange. What do these things have in common? Yep, they'd all look great nailed to my wall. You know, as posters, I'm not a psycho. I'm actually really smart because my posters never fall down or crinkle. They don't require me to hammer a nail into my wall. They don't even cost that much, because my posters are made of tough but exquisitely textured metal, and they're mounted with something as easy and safe as a magnet. I get them from Displate, where you will find everything from John's Cyberpunk to the Sigma grind set, anime ladies to Lionel Messi climbing a mountain for some reason. You can get yours at up to a 33% discount with my affiliate link below, and expect to have it at your door in 4 to 5 days' time. Displate. May your posters never again be floppy. Let's move on. I'll continue to be blunt. The elephant in the room is that Gotham Knights is a looter. It's got levels, health bars, and gear. And for the first half of the game, it's astoundingly shallow, and blindingly obvious that it was designed and implemented in the shortest time possible. Gear boils down to a number. It has no interesting traits, or at least none that matter in the early game, beyond health and damage. Upgrading, meanwhile, is a matter of making number go higher. Yes, there's a mod system, but you can only get one mod for your suit. Health, and health in practice is the basic stat of a suit, so you're making the exact same number go higher, but in a different screen. On your weapon, whose basic stat is damage, you can either boost elemental effect or crit chance, but the base elemental effect of early game weapons is so low that even if you boost it, it will still be too low to proc at a useful rate, so it's crit chance, which amounts to a bit more damage. Astoundingly shallow, and completely uninteresting, and quite remarkable, because despite that, it still manages to get the job done. The good news is that so long as you equip new gear once you get it, you'll rarely have problems with bullet sponges. Enemies scale to your level, but usually, better gear will still outpace them in practice. You consistently feel that you're getting stronger, and quickly too. Each major upgrade is noticeable. Gear this way becomes a more tangible and often more rewarding form of progress than skill points, whose upgrades are usually contextual, so not something you can immediately feel. There are far deeper loot systems out there that don't achieve this critical success. The second of its victories is how the loot looks. Your suit comes with a skin, you have 3 options on 4 parts of the skin to choose from, and a choice of color. It wouldn't be all that much if those options weren't reliably good, but they are reliably good. Skins are creative, there's lots of them, they appeal to a huge range of tastes, and draw from all over the comic world, which isn't to say there aren't any problems. Too many skins are unnecessarily rare, to the point that you could easily go multiple runs without getting them once. There's a transmog system, which is great, but transmog suits can't be customized, which is weird and bad, and ultimately a small dent in a significant success. I'd look forward to my outfits more than my stats, even going so far as to say, damn, in an American accent, audibly, when I got the first Albuster for Batgirl. Regular increases in strength and bus in drip add up to a loot system that can't be called a failure, despite how quickly I was convinced it would be. It's stunningly fine. Now let's stop beating around the bush and just beat the bush. What about combat? Well, it's not a spin on Arkham, despite the common and mistaken belief that Knights is trying to adapt or recreate the free flow system. It's closer, if anything, to the modern Assassin's Creeds. You have a light attack and a heavy. When enemies attack, you can either interrupt them with a fast enough attack of your own, or evade. If you evade at the right moment, you can perfect evade. The perfect evade allows you to perfect attack, and if you time your attacks at the exact moment a previous attack connects, you get a timed attack bonus. This is a decent foundation and standard fare stuff, but there are some important things to say, like that the timing windows on perfect dodges are appreciably challenging, and that timed attacks, though identical in concept to Arkham's critical strikes, have a different timing requirement, which means you can't just waltz in and immediately double your damage, something I greatly appreciated. I do take issue with the perfect attack controls. It can only be activated from a complete standstill, so you need to release all directional input, and that's not something that naturally happens in combat, or something that is tutorialized, which is why there are so many cases of people finishing the game still having no idea what the perfect attack looks like. On a positive note, what I'd call the combat's greatest strength is game feel. You hit like a fucking bullet train in this game. Heavy attacks have just the right amount of build-up and come crashing down to send smaller enemies flying back and larger enemies to their knees. Evades look decent, perfect evades are slick and rewarding, and perfect attacks beautifully return the momentum of a dodge with a bionic bitch slap from the underworld. Animation quality in general is high. Movesets are beautiful, extensive, and fit the character of every hero like a glove. It did not need to be this satisfying to throw batarangs, but it's Red Hood's pistols that steal the fucking show. His arms work independently from his body, allowing absolute fluidity in switching targets, and that is never not fun to watch. It's not John Wick you inhabit so much as Christian Bale in Equilibrium. Fuck, man. I really like hitting people in this game, and it's a good thing too. Game feel extends the time this simple mechanical foundation can continue to engage you, and it really needs that extension, because nearly every attempt it makes to develop itself mechanically ends with failure. Let's talk about enemy design. There's a lot of enemies, and I appreciate that. I like that most factions have several unique enemies to characterize them, and that most factions eventually upgrade their basic henchmen into more capable fighters who can interrupt your combos. I also think enemies in this game look and sound excellent. The growling voice of the Gladiator Talon, the rage in their swings. Really good stuff. My problem with enemy design in Gotham Knights are the repetitive responses they often enforce. The Talon, for instance, always attacks 2 times, and you have to dodge both. The League attack in a series of multiple sword strokes, and you can't escape or interrupt the flurry. Hunter Talons are more or less the same thing. It's the same extended response every time they attack. The reason I like fighting the League of Shadows is that it looks fucking awesome, but for half the duration of the fight, you're just dodging their basic attack combo. It's repetitive, it's dull, and it's not normal either. The closest Arkham dared to get to such a thing was Talia's assassins, but their flurry was half the length. You could avoid it outright if you dodged before it began. You didn't have to do it multiple times per fight, because they didn't have a long health bar, and you could deal with them in numerous ways, including explosive gel, the electric charge, and special combo moves. No such options exist in Gotham Knights. You can't skill your way out with a parry because there is no parry. There is no block. Your moveset is narrower than a bee's dick. You can't always space them out because they track so heavily. There's no choice to make, no option but to evade. Ranged enemies are susceptible to the same problem. Drone operators launch an aerial squadron that each behave as an individual firearm. When they take aim, all you can do is evade. Marksmen, who can't always be interrupted, eventually gain multiple bursts of fire, each of which must be evaded, and it tends to be that the enemies most capable of evade locking have the longest health bars, which means they're certain to be active for an extended period of time. In larger and later game fights, it can be comical that combat is divided between these overlong pauses, where the flow of decision-making stops, and your participation in combat is reduced to a single option, is my biggest problem with it, and it's not the only one. Some enemies have states of immunity in Gotham Knights. Corrupt cops and shielded roadhogs, for instance, can both raise their guard. You can wait this out, you can aim your weapon above the shield, you can use the environment, or you can break the guard with a heavy attack. Fair enough. It effectively encourages a change in tactics. The trouble is that sometimes they can enter this state of immunity without the guard animation. A corrupt cop might be aiming his weapon and be in his guard state at the same time. You waste an ability. You call bullshit. No telegraph, no fair. Now Talons have a unique guard state. Theirs can only be broken with a charged range attack, and frankly, I don't even know where to begin with the fuckery. For one, the charged range attack is not reliable. Sometimes the Talon simply ignores it, sometimes it targets the wrong enemy, or nothing, and you have to dodge both their cock-gobbling attacks once again. But the big problem is that with the exception of Red Hood's barrage, the charged ranged attack is pretty much the only thing you can do. The idea with immunity states like this isn't that you do one specific thing in response, it's that you do something differently. You change your tactics. With the guard break, there are multiple viable responses. With Arkham's most restrictive enemy, the Shield Bearer, you could aerial attack, or blow him up, or freeze him, or electrocute him. Most importantly, when the shield was dropped, you could work to ensure it was never picked up again. With the Talon, you charged ranged attack. And consider that the Talon's health bar is likely to be long enough to force this dance multiple times. It is the worst enemy I've faced in this type of game for a long while, because fighting them is always boring. And they're not the last of enemy design's war crimes. I'm gonna need you to take this literally. In the late game, the Court of Owls gain the ability to get back up after you kill them. With full health, you cannot interrupt it. You fight them, they self-res, then you fight them again. And it's only the strongest court members who had the most health to begin with that can do this. The Gladiator Talon's basic health bar could wrap around the fucking planet before they got another one. So if the fight hadn't grown dull yet, this is a 100% money back guarantee. Why? It's baffling. The Court of Owls is a disaster. So enemy design is decidedly mid. But there's still another elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about Nightwing's dump truck. There are 4 Gotham Knights. What does that mean for combat? Well, less than you might think. When it comes to differentiation, the game was always at a massive conceptual disadvantage. The Bat family aren't a good co-op cast. They're not made for contrast or complement. They're made to be iterations of Batman, and it shows. We've got Robin, who hits criminals but with a stick, Nightwing, who hits criminals but with 2 shorter sticks, and Batgirl, who hits criminals but with a bendy stick. Only Red Hood stands out conceptually, and that is reflected in play. Red Hood can step away from the fight and rely on the quick damage output of his firearms at a distance. If he rhythmically times his manual shots and aims for the head, his precision damage can be competitive. He has limited ammo and needs to reload, which can be done conventionally or with an ability. Playstyle and fantasy undergo a massive shift, and the combat system felt significantly refreshed when I switched from maining Batgirl to Red Hood. The difference between chick, dick and stick, however, is a lot more subtle, for the inevitable reason that they're all hitting people with sticks and the exact same baseline mechanics. The peaks of their difference are things like Nightwing's ability to pounce at enemies and chain multiple attacks together, or Batgirl's beatdown that does characterize her as the 1v1 brawler of the 4, or Robin's ability to ambush take down big enemies that makes his entrances especially powerful. Other momentum abilities do change, and none is ever an exact reskin of another character's, but they're also never enough to put a dent in playstyle. It's not nothing, but it's not far enough from nothing to be the kind of development this combat system needed. So what about co-op? With a friend or with a random through quick match? Well, it's a deeply conflicted experience. On the one hand, it's hard not to get a kick out of team-up takedowns and the general spectacle of 2 heroes back-to-back in battle. This is what Arkham could never provide. But it doesn't always feel as good as it looks, because on the other hand, servers are involved. You're gonna disconnect, you're gonna punch people for no damage, and you're gonna miss shots you hit. Again, on the one hand, online co-op adds a new layer of differentiation for each night. When the time comes, being the only one who can do a certain useful thing feels cool. Like reviving allies from a distance as Nightwing, or sharing medkits as Batgirl, or marking targets as Red Hood. On the other hand, online co-op is actually just as capable of subtracting as much differentiation as it adds, thanks again to the servers. When Batgirl's beatdown loses all reliability, she is no longer the 1v1 brawler. When Red Hood's bullets don't connect, it is no longer worth trying to play him with precision. When his turrets phase through the ground over 50% of the time, you get the idea. Co-op's hit or miss. It's up to the servers which is which in any moment. And that is a wrap on combat. It's not that deep, and it's deeply flawed, but it's satisfying, and that amounts to a decidedly okay time. Let's hope the game's attempts to mix it up, be it with objective design, stealth, or with the campaign itself, can push the gameplay experience a little further. Now, beneath defeat all the enemies, Gotham Knights' second favourite objective type is perform a contextual button press. In Hostage Rescue, for instance, you need to hold the defuse prompt on each hostage for an extended time. In organ trafficking, it's the same to pick up the organ. You can't be interrupted. If you are, your progress drops to 0. This is a long period of vulnerability, so the idea is that you're pressured to correctly identify a time window or to create a time window by distracting and/or defeating enemies. That's the idea. In practice, things don't always work so smoothly. If you're detected and there's a timer, it's almost always too little time to defeat everyone. You can try leading them away from the console, but if that doesn't work, the only viable strategy is to just keep trying to fill the prompt and hope they don't interrupt you for the required length of time. Success and failure now comes entirely down to luck, and it can be agonizing. The best part is that you actually need to hold it for a little bit longer than the UI makes it seem, which leads to moments like this, where it looks like you should win, only to discover that you've lost. That's always fun, and the problems with this objective type go far beyond the fundamental. What if I told you that the biggest problem with movement in Gotham Knights isn't that it makes traversing Gotham boring, it's that this game has the worst character control I have seen in a third-person AAA game since Assassin's Creed Unity. Walking, running, or crouching with precision is made challenging and painful by staggeringly poor input response times, and what seems to be a kind of stickiness that requires you to almost pull away from certain objects to free yourself from their magnetism. Most of the time, it's not a big deal, but when you're trying to align yourself with those contextual prompts, a couple seconds is often the difference between success and failure. And a couple seconds is often what the game's pre-alpha character control costs you. This has happened to me several times during my first playthrough alone. It's insane that it could even happen once, but it is not the only victim of character control. Let's talk about stealth, Gotham Knights' third favourite gameplay scenario. I'll cut to the chase. The biggest problem with stealth is that the game's batshit movement flings you off perches unpredictably, and half the time that'll plant you directly in front of an enemy. This has, on several occasions, though unfortunately unrecorded, resulted in the detection that would ultimately cause the contextual prompt cycle of doom. The second biggest problem with stealth is that it barely exists. Arenas have no more than 2 levels of elevation, and most enemies within them usually huddle together, which means the best that you can do is slowly pick off the furthest from the pack and hope no one turns around. Your moveset, meanwhile, is the stealth takedown. Yep, have fun. Okay, I'll be fair. Batgirl can hack panels to distract enemies, and Robin can use Arkham's inverted takedown, which is completely useless because it's loud. But even if every character had both those moves, stealth would still make Assassin's Creed Valhalla look like Metal Gear Solid 5. And the third biggest problem is that the stealth takedown button is the same as the ranged weapon button, so if you're just a bit misaligned, which thanks to the game's dickhead movement is not unlikely, you can guess what happens next. Fun times. Fun times. So perhaps it's a good thing that even the player who chooses to engage with stealth has no incentive to maintain it for long. Stealth takedowns can't be interrupted in Gotham Knights, so the smartest play is to rush into the pack and ambush the highest value target. This is quick, safe, and makes for a highly effective entrance 100% of the time. Why do anything else? Why slowly pick off stragglers with such a high risk of being discovered when you could rush in and take out a dangerous enemy for free who is alone worth more than 10 basic goons? The best thing that can be said about stealth in Gotham Knights is that the animation quality is as stellar here as everywhere else. It's always satisfying, and it's always extra. You did not need to do that, Nightwing. Please keep doing that, Batgirl. But yeah, stealth sucks ass. Moving on. There's about 3 movement challenges in Gotham Knights. Yes, they actually look like this. Yes, the Court of Owls, who executes prisoners by falling, have a fully rigged Crash Bandicoot temple run at the bottom, despite the fact that anyone who could see it would already be dead from the falling. But as you've probably guessed already, absurdity is the least of their problems. They're a precise movement challenge in a game where characters are about as quick off the mark as Sisyphus' fucking boulder. I hated all of them, and that leaves Gotham Knights with its puzzles. The detective side of the Bat fantasy was something Arkham never fully committed to, so it was nice to have to piece clues together in Gotham Knights like an actual detective. Unfortunately, more than a test of intellect, they tend to be a test of patience, because so long as you thoroughly examine all the text boxes and make a very simple leap, the answer usually becomes obvious. It can feel like a reading exercise more than a puzzle. There's only a few, but any more, and they might have outstayed their welcome. The rest of the game's puzzles are closer to Zelda than Sherlock Holmes. Big rooms and manipulable objects. There's 5 of them, and all of them are trivial. There's a symbol inside an owl ball. You have to match it with the same symbols written on the ground. There are construction dates written on a wall. You have to put the buildings in order of age. Simple stuff. The hardest is aligning shadows to form the image of an owl, but only because there are multiple configurations that could create the intended result, and so getting the correct one comes down entirely to trial and error. They're insubstantial, and that's the show. That's the gameplay in Gotham Knights. Failed spins on combat, failed distractions from combat, more combat, and emptiness, from which the campaign continually suffers. It has a severe drought of ideas to populate the in-between. For vast portions of Arkham Asylum, Gotham Mines, the Cemetery, and the Powers Club too, you're just moving through the environment, running, walking, grappling. At times it can even feel unfinished. In terms of gameplay, Gotham Knights is a truly unremarkable experience. But I think the most important thing there is to be said about its 5 quick and insubstantial puzzles is how ridiculous they are. It's easy to forgive a game for looking gamey. Trading immersion for fun is a sacrifice most are willing to make. But Gotham Knights chose a very specific archenemy, the Court of Owls, the Illuminati of Gotham, so secretive, so powerful, that even those who actually believe they're more than a myth would never say it out loud, not even a whispered word, because they're always listening. They're inside the walls. The secrecy of the court is their entire thing. The concept is effective because it plays on the fear of the unknown, and for about 2 missions after the knights decide to find the court, the game makes a praiseworthy effort. Penguin's most interesting characteristic is that he is scared of the Court of Owls. Even he's not going to say a word without assurances. The atmosphere builds, and then deflates the instant you find them. Giant, bonkers, trivial puzzles, half of which are inside the court hideouts. So who are they trying to keep out? Members who don't know how to count? Or what an owl looks like? A lot of trouble to hide this room, says Jason, having found Jacob Kane's secret office behind an effortless Sudoku puzzle covered in owl symbols. It's with an idea like the court that gaminess can't be afforded or forgiven, because it's with an idea like the court that it hurts most. And this does not stop at puzzles. Giant, empty, cavernous hideouts that look designed for combat encounters in a video game, not as the hideout of a secret society. Evidence of their crimes lie around in the form of pictograms and PowerPoint presentations with unaltered voice recordings. You've got court members talking about the court out loud in the hotel. Then, of course, you've got the goons. How often are Court of Owls hideouts being infiltrated for the muscle to be so numerous and so unsurprised by your presence? This is supposedly a cabal of the wealthy, but 90% of their members seem to be black-clad martial artists. They soon begin committing crimes out in the open world, not of course in broad daylight, but in clear view of anyone who so much as looks out a window. What makes the Court of Owls interesting is completely obliterated a third of the way into the game. Even the identity of their leader is revealed, though it is not exactly a twist. From the cutscene at the end of the first court mission, we know the voice of the court is thin, white, male, powerful, and has a deep, distinctive voice. And there is a thin, white, male, powerful character with a deep, distinctive voice, who the game draws a lot of attention to, despite his not being a part of mainstream Batman canon, Jacob Kane. That should be enough to tip you off. But then you see his base of operations, and it looks like Willy Wonka's fuckery emporium. You know what, guys? I think he might be evil. You could see that shit coming from the Voyager probes.
Jacob Kane?
It's Arkham, again, that can shed light on how such an elusive faction could work in the context of a third-person action game. A secret organization centuries old, hidden in Gotham's bones. A building sense of mystery and foreboding. Don't you remember? Wonder City? I've already talked at extreme length how this level managed to craft its exquisite atmosphere, but I'd highlight for this discussion the way enemy encounters were always delivered as unpredictable ambushes, or that assassins weren't trivialized by having them everywhere all the time, or that the means by which they might be watching you were visualized, creating a constant sense of tension, or that Wonder City was believable as an ancient buried city, and it made sense that those hiding there would never have been found. Gotham Knights doesn't just fail to keep the court at arm's length for long enough, it completely humanizes them, brings them down to the level of a street gang, and leaves you with the impression that they'd be unable to hide their identity for more than 20 minutes, let alone 5 centuries. And their problems go far beyond the almost immediate ruination of their only interesting characteristic. The court fail as villains. Capturing you with an intelligent trap and forcing you through a Rube Goldberg mindfuck torture chamber was, for all its faults, the campaign's most creative narrative idea, and the most significant move the court make against the Knights. The problem is, it's also the only move the court make against the Knights. 10 minutes later, we break out of their ridiculous contraption and destroy most of their army. One mission before, most of their leadership was slaughtered at the Orchard Hotel by the League of Shadows, and one mission afterwards, we take out their leader. For most of the campaign, a villain so secretive and powerful that not even Batman made a move. crumbles helplessly against the Knights' campaign. This is the Court of Owls. There's no sense of escalation, no sense of push and pull, no sense of menace, or that the court should be taken seriously. The fact that they have an army of eternally loyal super soldiers at their disposal only adds to the impression of their incompetence, because they achieve nothing with it. We even lack an emotional motive to make this John Wick-style curb stomp satisfying on a cathartic level. It was Ra's that killed Batman. The court was just a research project. Gotham Knights' villains are a catastrophic failure, and it's not like the story has an excellent cast of protagonists either. The best thing that can be said about the story is that it's never boring. You're whisked quickly from one pretty environment to the next, one plot development to another, one conversation with a cool villain like Harley Quinn to Talia to Penguin to Kane. Voice performances are hit or miss, but the villains are always a hit, with one of the best Harleys we've had in years.
I almost forgot about my special surprise!
And Talia nailing every line she's given.
I suppose gratitude was too much to expect in exchange for another stab at life.
I also can't ignore how impressive it is that every major cutscene in the game adapts to fit your choice of knight. Talia brings Jason's past into play, Harley mocks Barbara and Dick differently, and so does Kane when he's captured. Tim exhibits a clearly timid demeanor, where the others are more practiced and confident. With solid performances, decent visuals, and a fast pace, Gotham Knights never fails to entertain. That makes this game worth some money, but what it almost always fails to do is to ever go beyond that surface level. Now, it's easy enough to tell you what isn't in the game, and that's character work. In the optional cutscenes, you might be treated to an exception. Though buried amongst a trove of shallow, strange, or painfully cliched nothing, there are some engaging ideas. That Barbara has spent so long idolizing her heroes that she started to forget who they truly were. The idea that Jason is tired of being feared. None of this goes anywhere, but they helped. Otherwise, it isn't a particularly emotional story. It's plot-driven. I think my biggest problem with what there is something that will initially sound weird. Awkwardness, offness, and I'm not talking about flaws that only become apparent when you look for them. I'm talking constant, overt stupidity that is hard not to notice. The Court of Owls' Willy Wonka-style death traps whose absurdity can't help but be funny is an example we've already seen, but it is hard to believe how deep this disease runs, or how little is unaffected. Let's get specific. You'll see what I mean. First step in the fight against the court is talking to Harley Quinn. Her bad bitch book of baloney supposedly contains within it proof not only of the court's existence, but of their operation. Now strap your ass to your seat because stunningly enough, Harley escapes prison. How? Via a big ass hole in her cell, which she proudly displays to our knight, who proceeds to do absolutely nothing about it. We go after her book, now tied to the balloon, and we are then stunned to learn that she escaped prison. Good job, Batgirl. This is why your movie got cancelled. We find the balloon in the prison yard. We hear a ticking noise, a bomb, and what Batgirl does is prepare to box it.
What now?
Okay, we take the book back to the Belfry. The team spends a while mulling over the evidence board until Barbara has a brainwave. She sees a pattern that before was missed, because Harley's stupid system makes no sense. It's that in every case, key witnesses were murdered and their bodies were hung from knives. How didn't you see this blindingly obvious pattern immediately? How could any stupid system have hidden it? The answer is, it couldn't. The writers want the impression of an intelligent leap, but it ends up feeling forced. Now, Penguin apparently is some kind of exception to the pattern, so it's off to the Iceberg Lounge. Tim complains that Batman would never take him, and Jason replies that if Tim wanted a fake ID, all he had to do was ask. This, for some reason, is interpreted by Dick as undue aggression, and he decides the best way to defuse the supposed tension is to get up in Jason's face. Yeah, that'll work, Dick. Regardless, the Iceberg Lounge awaits. I can't tell if it's more John Wick or Dark Knight to fuck up Penguin's nightclub muscle with the music blaring in the background, but I know it was a highlight. You boot his door down, and you know what he says? That you're not worth his time. Get lost. And that's what you do. Tail between your legs. What? As absurd as it is that Jason would tolerate Penguin's shit, Tim nor Barbara would fight 8 guards to let the reason for doing so decline their request either. How are we going to make Penguin take us seriously? Barbara asks Alfred back at the Belfry. He suggests that you should stop some crimes, and Babs, as if stunned by this answer, replies,
The city. We've been so preoccupied with Batman's last case, we've neglected the rest of Gotham.
This is the second time Batgirl has acted surprised that there's a lot of crime currently taking place in Gotham, which, I do not need to remind you, is the basis for her existence. Let's skip some time ahead to when Jason, or whoever you choose, is thrown into court jail. After clearing the death trap, you fall down a mountain of skeletons and eventually find one holding a court key. You also learn their motive. They're searching for a Lazarus pit in Gotham. Back at base, Dick says the court seem pretty kill-happy for people who want eternal life. Jason gets offended. The League prove that isn't true. But I'd be offended too because of how obvious it is the League proved that isn't true. Ra's just killed Batman, and Dick's comment is both unbelievably stupid and completely out of character. Dick then reminds everyone that one of the bodies was holding a key, and that it might open something useful. Thanks, Dick. Hadn't thought of that. Tim says the scans reveal an isotope in the key's metal that matches somewhere in Gotham. Jason interjects as if Tim was overcomplicating things, that it's a damn key, and Barbara concludes that we should therefore find what it opens. The Knights react as if she had said the smartest thing so far, despite having only repeated what Dick said, who himself only repeated the simplest assumption that this entire conversation was founded on. Then, out in Gotham, we're immediately told to head to the Gazette, because it's a match for Tim's isotope. You can't make this shit up. In a later cutscene, Talia leaves by leap of faith. Jason says,
Now I know how Montoya feels.
No, Bat people disappear whilst unobserved.
Oh yeah, I got a full desk of open cases, it says. God damn it.
Talia used a smoke bomb in our direct view. A massive and obvious distinction. Maybe that's pedantic, but how does a game like this make such a glaring mistake? It goes on. Before unlocking our knighthood abilities, every knight has a cutscene where they stare at Batman's memorial, fixate on a particular part of his suit that usually has no connection whatsoever to the ability they're about to unlock, awkwardly say, out loud a few times, and then invent the ability. It's dumbfounding. But somehow it's worse when the fixation makes sense, like with Barbara and Batman's cape. Having spent years wearing a cape, and working under Batman who glides with his cape, Batgirl discovers, as if by a brainwave, that she could use her cape to glide. Let's jump forward again. Alfred tells you to return to the Belfry immediately. There's an urgent call to listen to. You do, and it's Penguin, whose life is seemingly in danger. Hang on a minute. If this was an SOS call, why in the fuck didn't Alfred play it through our headset, instead of calling us back to the Belfry, canonically letting an entire day pass to listen to it with a cooler speaker setup? Kinda hurts the sense of urgency. The distress call turns out to be the ruse that places you in the court's labyrinth. Most of their leadership was killed the mission before, but instead of taking the chance to kill you, they instead construct a giant mechanical torture chamber for the lols. But let's not get bogged down with that. You break out and return to the Belfry. It's here that the game softly implies every hero went through the same trauma, which makes no sense because only one hero was captured. Despite having known about Talons for days, Robin goes mental over their affront to nature and ultimately hints at killing. Barbara rightly chews him out for this, but instead of trying to diffuse the tension, Dick acts like Barbara just dropped an N-bomb. What did she do that was more out of line than Tim suggesting killing? It's forced. I'll show you one more example. This is the worst of them. When you bring Kane down from Barad-dûr to hand him over to the cops, he's shot dead by a mystical arrow. A fun twist. Some drama plays out below, and the editing implies it takes almost 30 seconds for Red Hood to finally turn his head to the shooter, who is Talia, who is still there, happily allowing herself to be seen. She runs away as if she hadn't just invited her own discovery, and when you finally catch the slippery sausage, she explains her evil plan, which is the exact same as Raish's plan, to destroy Gotham. Well, that's not very interesting. But what's dumb is that she needlessly tells us this moments before ordering a hit on our most vulnerable allies, which we never would have been able to prevent if she hadn't effectively warned us. And here's the best part. You get 3 protection objectives and you don't need to do all 3. Alfred tells you it's good enough after saving Fox and Montoya, so you can just leave Dr. Tompkins there to fend for herself, which is what I did. Now you see what I mean. Gotham Knights made me feel like I was playing a mistranslation half the time, and I must emphasize that I could have shown you twice as many examples, but chose only the ones that are easiest to explain. And the same awkwardness applies, perhaps more so, to the optional cutscenes. This is a spectacularly nonsensical game, which makes it that much harder to take it seriously. It's entertaining, but painful if you expect anything more. Now, this isn't an example of internal dumbassery so much as a poor creative decision, but I also don't think it works to swap out the Court for the League as primary villains. Not only does it finalize the Court feeling like a waste, but oddly, it doesn't actually seem to change anything either. Both are secretive organizations who exert their power through assassination, and who wish to use the health kit Kool-Aid to create armies of eternally loyal super soldiers, as we find out from Talia's experiments in Arkham Asylum one mission later. In practice, there's almost no difference between the Court and the League. Everything that could go wrong with a last-minute villain switch did, but what do we get in return? After Arkham Asylum, Talia's man-bats are let loose in Gotham. You're told to defeat 3 of them. They're significantly higher level than you. They'll scale to stay that way, which makes this the largest difficulty spike in the campaign, and the only time in the campaign that a run-in with enemies who feel like bullet sponges is likely, and it sucks. It's also not the only thing we need to talk about regarding progression, like the loot, which in the late game grows grows from its shallow beginnings into more than a basic stat. For one, elemental effects are now strong enough to proc at a reasonable rate, which means elemental builds are now viable, and deliberately pursuing elemental damage in combat is now reasonable. This is big. Applying elemental effects adds new depth to combat. You're encouraged to pick a worthwhile target and to hit them repeatedly with your elemental weapon, which might not be your stick, it might be a ranged weapon. And in this way, elemental damage can change not just target prioritization, but your playstyle too. Toxic made my batarangs worth using, and because all gear at the higher level is stronger, every time you switch gear, something noticeable is likely to change. A ranged Batgirl could be encouraged back to melee. A bioelectric Red Hood could become a cryo Red Hood. Combat now receives this subtle but appreciated variation consistently, and that doesn't make it more than mediocre, but it's a significant step up. If loot was surprisingly fine before, now it's surprisingly good. I now looked forward to returning to the Belfry and going out the next night to test my new incendiary bullets on petty criminals trying to feed their families. If it's here, in the late game, that you choose to wrap up some side missions, then it's also now you'll learn that there is at least one major casualty of Gotham Knights' level-based progression system. Most everyone scales with you, both out in the city and in the story, but not in side missions. God knows why. And it's a problem, because this way one could easily make the mistake of not doing them at exactly the right time, in which case you're going to be over-leveled, likely by a lot, which is a shame. The side missions are as good as the main missions in Gotham Knights. Environments are big, new, and often so impressive as to outshine the campaign. Though sporting the game's usual awkwardness, the cutscenes are half decent too. There's nothing going on with Harley's character in Gotham Knights, but her plan to inhabit Dr. Oz and get a desperate populace hooked on high-tech supercrack that turns them into psychos was creative and consistently entertaining. She's also funny and hot. Clayface, meanwhile, is shaped out as an almost tragic character, unable to think clearly after injury sustained in his last fight with Batman, still only wanting to be seen. I'm sure then he'd be happy to hear that the performances in these cutscenes are universally solid, even from Freeze, who is by far the least interesting character of the three. I don't mind having a Freeze who is a villain wholeheartedly, but his only thing now is freezing people, and that's what he does, he just freezes people. Real interesting. In terms of gameplay, there's not much to see here. Clayface's chase set piece was a looker, but it's mechanically empty. The highlights are the boss fights, and yet they are still unremarkable. This is still enemy design in Gotham Knights, so with the exception of certain freeze attacks that put the emphasis on spacing, it's ultimately a matter of mashing the evade button until an obvious damage window opens. What's good is that they completely nail the spectacle, and can provide a decent challenge if you're the right level. It's odd how insignificant the side quests ultimately came to feel by the end. With the exception of Clayface, Harley and Freeze are locked away with the expectation that they're just going to break out and do it again. It's as if Gotham Knights didn't want to commit to anything that would have a lasting effect on the Gotham Knights universe. And there's something else that didn't quite leave me satisfied, that there are so few. It's Harley, Freeze, and Clayface. That's it. And I think it'd seem like too little even if the main story wasn't all so short. But it is. You don't expect Talia's stint as Villainess Prime to end with 3 soldiers. You certainly don't expect the game to end on its worst mission. The cemetery is outstandingly bad. It doesn't even make sense. A tunnel is bored into the earth beneath the Wayne family crypt for what seems like 1,000 miles, and there's no explanation whatsoever for how this tunnel got there, or why it's covered in occasionally explosive lamps. This is especially weird because your base movement speed will outpace the time it takes for them to explode, so there's no challenge. You just keep moving, and the lamps will harmlessly detonate behind you. There's also the odd platform to shoot. You need them as grapple points to get across the widest chasms, but don't ask me why. There's no reason the grapple shouldn't be able to connect to the other side of the chasm. And there's no reason Batgirl's cape or Red Hood's jump should be mysteriously disabled. In terms of combat, the cemetery is a sequence of several almost identical encounters with the League of Shadows. Most levels could at least rely on their visuals, but it looks like you're cave diving in someone's rectum, which is appropriate because it sucks complete arse. Speaking of us, Talia is found at the end, with Gotham's preemie supply of gamer girl bathwater and Bruce Wayne inside it. He has been brainwashed to abandon his beliefs, to lead the League in their crusade, and to wipe the floor with you. The fight is weak. Bruce has far too much health to keep his 2 combos entertaining. Inevitably, we end up appealing to his buried soul, and Talia tags in to finish the fight. This is the final boss. It has 2 phases, an appropriate level of difficulty for a final fight, and a surprisingly strong soundtrack, which is a first for Gotham Knights. But it does have its problems. One, that its difficulty is largely determined by how many medkits you went in with. If you add 1, you will have 1 medkit to last Bruce, Talia, and Talia Phase 2, even after you die. which makes it the hardest fight in Gotham Knights tenfold, and massively harder than it would be for any other player. It's easy to feel frustrated. You couldn't know ahead of time that this was a boss or that it would be so big. You can either push ahead or reboot the game to spawn outside the fight. I've also got a bone to pick with Talia's AoE attack. The build-up is very quick, so if you began an attack before she moved, it's possible to get locked into being hit. Talia is a patch away from being the best boss fight in the game. For me, she was a bittersweet note to end on. And then the story ended too, and that just left me bitter. Talia escapes. Bruce flies the Batwing into the Lazarus Pit, destroying himself and the Court of Owls, who turned up during the boss fight to get instantly fucked. Again. Your chosen knight proclaims himself the protector of Gotham and reminds the people that despite being a bunch of complete clowns who couldn't outwit a fucking salmon, the Court of Owls are still at large. The problem is instantly apparent. Insignificance. Talia wasn't defeated, the court weren't defeated, Batman didn't come back, and very little changed for the Knights. There's a heroic speech and a heroic score, but there's no justification for it. There's no sense of closure. Some emotional catharsis exists in seeing the Knights get a proper goodbye from Bruce, but ultimately, the ending is woefully flat. I can't help but feel the story might have been held back by having to accommodate every knight. It's clear this ending is most appropriate for just one of them. Jason, more than any other character, had to live up to Batman. He, more than any other character, understood death, what it meant to be resurrected, and what it was to be subjected to a Lazarus Pit. Jason does for Bruce here what Bruce did for Jason. We now show him the path, bring him back from the brink, and that makes this scene work in a way that it doesn't for Barbara or Dick, because this act specifically from Jason is what proves to Bruce that he isn't needed. His troubled child is all grown up, and Batman can die in peace, knowing Gotham has its protector. This is the ending to a story Gotham Knights didn't tell, but it does seem like it wanted to. Jason sits in the dead center of what smells like an unrealized theme. The idea of life after death connects him, the Court of Owls, the League of Shadows, and of course, Batman's legacy. The groundwork for a theme is clearly laid, but it's never switched on. Nothing's ever done with it or said. Was there something more to this game once? Was Red Hood's ending a glimpse? Will we ever know? Probably not. And that's the story of Gotham Knights. It's entertaining, it's nothing more. Let's talk about the endgame. For the first month of Gotham Knights' life, the endgame focused on grinding for legendary gear from very hard crimes. With the city and its strengths taking center stage, things were in a tolerable place. In 30-minute sessions, it's fun to come on, beat the piss out of some bad guys and gear up. But getting anything decent was far too long a grind. And what was most clearly missing was a motive. There was no high-level content, no raid, dungeon, or challenge mode, no reason to play Gotham Knights again. For a month, the game was dead. And then, on the 29th of November, the 12 people who still cared got what they asked for, or so they thought. Heroic Assault is a 30-floor dungeon that descends from level 25 to the new level cap, 60. Starro the Conqueror waits at the end. The first problem is immediately obvious. You have to start at floor 1, which means you have to start with level 25 content. But almost anyone playing Heroic Assault is above level 25, which means almost everyone is going to have to waste time clearing floors of trivial enemies for useless loot. That was about 6 in my case. For that boy Aqua, it would have been 15 hours of wasted time. We're not off to a good start. Now, each floor consists of several rooms. You can have defeat all the enemies, defeat all the high-value targets, defend the console, repair the generators, and escort the transport. The second problem is with the contextual prompts in transport escort and generator repair. As opposed to crimes in Gotham, progress here takes a lot more time, but it isn't lost when you're interrupted, it's cumulative, and some of the frustration is relieved as a result. But that doesn't stop the problem from emerging. You can only beat the room once the prompt is finished. Enemies will continue to spawn until then, so why waste time fighting? Your best move is to start pressing it again as soon as you're interrupted and hope for the best. And the torturous character control continues to stand in your way. Stealth isn't always possible either. In generator repair, it depends entirely on your partner, and it is impossible outright when you have to repair the transport. So what about the capacity of these rooms to keep things varied? Well, from one perspective, you are heavily encouraged to change your tactics. Generator repair encourages stealth, so does high-value targets because you want to take them out instantly with stealth takedowns. In console defense, meanwhile, you will lose if you don't play the objective, which makes this the only gameplay scenario in Gotham Knights that successfully pressures awareness and positioning. But from another perspective, there are multiple waves of enemies in most rooms, there are several rooms to each floor, and there are 30 floors. That's around 100 rooms before the end, 250 waves of enemies in total, and there are 5 gameplay scenarios. 5. To a limited degree, these gameplay scenarios can be set in different room arenas, but there are still only 5 possible room arenas. Now, Transport Escort and its room are much rarer than the others, so in practice, it's usually the same 4 arenas and the same 4 gameplay scenarios. You're gonna see them around 25 times each by the end. It'll take 8 to 10 hours, and yeah, they're always grey. However bad you think this sounds, trust me, It's worse. The repetition is astonishing. There were periods of Heroic Assault that are the worst experiences I have had gaming in years. Endlessly wailing on a Gladiator Talon only for him to get back up with full health, having done the same thing for 2 hours previously, that's the kind of shit that makes you question your life choices. Co-op isn't an enhancement to this as much as it is therapy. Sharing the torture with a friend was itself a better thing than every floor of content combined. And I'm including the last one.
That looks like a payload. We're not escorting that to like a disposal area, are we?
The problem with Starro isn't that he's a bad fight. He isn't a fight. He's a transport escort objective followed by a generator repair objective and a man-bat at the end. That's your reward. That's floor 30. A starfish in a jar, contextual prompts, and yet another man-bat. If Heroic Assault is a joke, and that's exactly what it is, this is the punchline. But you know what? Even in the moment, I found it funny. It's that bad that you get a kick out of it. It's like watching Birdemic with popcorn and friends. Enjoying its failures was the best thing about Heroic Assault. But believe it or not, it's not the only positive. I think it's a testament to the strength of the game feel in Gotham Knights that there was always some pleasure to be found in the endless combat. Even when I was being stun-locked or evade-locked, even when my bullets did nothing because of server issues or enemy design made me want to uninstall my fucking organs, there was still the satisfaction of channeling Christian Bale and punching people into orbit. 4-player co-op was a blast. The game isn't designed for it, and the screen becomes a barely comprehensible clusterfuck which made me feel like I was having a stroke, and that was pretty cool. I think what stood out most as a positive though was the continued strength of the progression. From levels 40 to 60, the sense that every upgrade means something if nothing else intensifies. One level 60 mod is worth 3 level 40 mods, so before long you can start applying elemental effects every other hit, and build for critical damage at the same time. Basically, you can become broken, and for an endgame that's a good thing. I had a broken cryo build, a broken toxic build. I applied bioelectric so fast I could barely see my targets. Ranged focus became a melee focus, weakness became strength, and even my suit changed from making me almost unkillable to providing an inexhaustible supply of abilities. Endgame gear is fun in Gotham Knights, and it is the bright side in an unforgivable amount of dark. For the first 2 weeks of Heroic Assault, it was the endgame. The campaign in Gotham City wouldn't scale past level 40, so both became irrelevant and stupidly trivial. Gotham Knights, once again, was dead. 2 weeks later, they fixed it. By allowing the city to scale, the player interested in preserving their sanity could continue to progress in the city with very hard crimes. Unfortunately, I am not very hard. I'm floppier than a fucking sea bass, mate. We're back where we started, and we've all got better games to play. I recommend Gotham Knights, for no more than $20. Thank you for watching. Special thanks go out to L. Hudson, Lex Williams, Dominic Jaworski, Andre Baltuta, Holy Shift, Dennis Williams, Combat Wombat, John Lemley, Shade, Joshua W. Schreiner, Bozian, Dylan Schaefer Murphy, Warthol, The Last Great Opium Den. I joined Tier 3 because I wanted to hear Whitelight say this out loud. Dan Walker, Newts, Rakin Hock, Nathan, Attila, Brendan Harris, Caleb Finnemore, DJ, Chino, Chase Baker, Eli Weaver, G. Series, William Vossler, Joe Simmons, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Navy Husky, Save, MT the Poet, Voy, Deluxo, Calvin Black, Dr. Pavel, The Wayfinder 12, Malone Patron, John C, Corey Walterbeek, Hidibri, Anton, Floyd Dibben, Storyteller Max, Monochrome Only, Rolo Runner, Brybase, Milo W, Jason H, Fat Guy 688, Shahzabe Arshad Mirza, Purple PP, Pitstab, Joshua Lovejoy, Vincent DeLuca, Veda, and Joseph F.